What if I told you that the person who pulls away the most is often the one craving the deepest connection? That the one who seems distant is secretly living in a world of powerful emotional fantasies, and if you understand that world, you don't chase them, they choose you. Today, you're going to discover how to step into that hidden space, speak their emotional language, and become someone they can't walk away from. There's a powerful truth most people miss when it comes to human connection, especially with those who pull away, those who seem distant, those who guard their hearts like a fortress. People often think avoidant individuals don't feel deeply. That's not true. In fact, they feel so deeply that they've learned to protect themselves from the intensity of it. Understand this, they don't run from love, they run from losing control. Inside their mind is a world of vivid, emotional, carefully constructed fantasy where connection feels safe, where love exists without pressure, where they can experience closeness without the fear of being overwhelmed. And here's the shift that changes everything. If you try to drag them out of that world, you lose them. But if you learn to step into that world, you become part of it. You see, most people make the mistake of forcing certainty. They demand answers, labels, reassurance. But pressure doesn't create connection, it creates resistance. And resistance is where avoidants disappear. Instead, you must become someone who understands emotional rhythm. Someone who knows when to step forward and when to step back. Because attraction for an avoidant grows in space, not in suffocation. When you stop chasing, something extraordinary happens. You activate curiosity. You become intriguing. You become someone they think about when you're not there. And in their world, thinking is powerful. Imagination is powerful. Emotion lies strongest in what is not fully possessed. Play to that. Be present but not overwhelming. Be warm but not consuming. Be consistent but never predictable to the point of losing mystery. Because mystery is what feeds their internal world. It keeps them engaged. It allows them to build a version of connection that feels safe and exciting at the same time. And here's the deeper truth: this isn't about manipulation. This is about alignment. It's about understanding how someone experiences connection and meeting them there without losing yourself. Because if you abandon your own truth just to hold on to someone, you haven't built Lvov, built dependency. But when you stand grounded in who you are, when you bring calm energy instead of chaos, when you become a space where they don't feel judged, pressured, or trapped, you become rare. And rare is unforgettable. Avoidants don't stay where they feel controlled. They stay where they feel free. They stay where connection feels like a choice, not an obligation. So instead of asking, how do I make them stay? Ask yourself, how do I become someone? They don't want to leave. You do that by becoming emotionally strong, centered, patient. You stop reacting to their distance and start responding with understanding. You stop trying to pull them closer and instead create an energy that draws them in naturally. Because the moment they feel safe, truly safe, something shifts. They lean in. They open up. They choose. And when an avoidant chooses you not because they have to, not because they're pressured, but because they feel something real in your presence, that connection becomes powerful. So rise above the need to control outcomes. Master your energy. Understand their world. And become someone who doesn't chase love, but creates it in a way that others are drawn to. That's where your power is. Avoidants are often misunderstood because their behavior on the surface seems detached, uninterested, or emotionally unavailable. But beneath that exterior lies a rich inner world that operates very differently from what most people expect. They are not driven primarily by what is happening in front of them in real time. Instead, they are guided by what is happening inside their Arabic noon, their imagination, their emotional projections, and the private narratives they build about connection. This is why trying to engage them purely through direct emotional demands or logical discussions often falls flat. You're speaking to the outside while their real experience is unfolding on the inside. For an avoidant, fantasies are not just idle thoughts, they are emotional safe zones. In these imagined spaces, they can experience closeness, affection, and even deep love without the risk of losing control or feeling overwhelmed. Reality, on the other hand, can feel unpredictable and intense. Real people have expectations, needs, and emotions that can feel like pressure. Fantasies don't. Fantasies are controlled, curated, and safe. This is why an avoidant might seem distant in person but still think about you often when you're not around. Their connection to you grows not only through interaction but through reflection, imagination, and emotional distance. This creates a powerful dynamic. The less pressure they feel in reality, the more space they have to engage with you in their internal world. And in that internal world, emotions are amplified. A small moment, a subtle gesture, a meaningful look, these can become significant in their minds because they replay it, reinterpret it, and attach meaning to it over time. What might seem minor to you can become emotionally impactful for them because of how they process it internally. However, when reality becomes too intense, when there is too much demand for clarity, commitment, or constant presence that disrupts that internal balance. It pulls them out of their safe imaginative space and forces them into an environment where they feel exposed. This is often when they withdraw, not because they don't care, but because the emotional intensity exceeds what they feel equipped to handle in. Moment, their instinct is to regain control, and distance becomes their way of doing that. Understanding this changes how you approach connection. Instead of trying to force emotional closeness through constant communication or heavy conversations, you begin to recognize the value of subtlety. You allow space for their imagination to engage. You realize that connection doesn't only happen when you're physically present or actively talking, it also happens in the quiet moments in between, where their mind fills in the gaps. This doesn't mean becoming distant or unavailable in an unhealthy way. It means being intentional with your energy. It means creating interactions that feel meaningful but not overwhelming. It means leaving room for curiosity instead of trying to answer every question immediately. Because curiosity is what fuels their internal world. When they don't fully have you, their mind naturally explores you. They think about your words, your tone, your presence, and in doing so, they build a deeper emotional experience than what might occur through constant direct engagement. At the same time, authenticity remains essential. Their internal world is sensitive to inconsistency. If what they imagine about you doesn't align with how you actually show up, it creates confusion and distance. So while you allow space for their fantasies to develop, you also stay grounded in who you are. You don't try to become a fantasy, you simply give their mind something real and intriguing to engage with. This balance between presence and space, between reality and imagination, is what makes connection with an avoidant unique. Their attachment doesn't always grow in obvious ways. It grows quietly, internally, often without immediate expression. But when nurtured correctly, that internal connection can become incredibly strong because it is built not just on what they see, but on what they feel, imagine, and emotionally invest in over time. At the core of an avoidance, behavior is not a lack of desire for connection, but a heightened sensitivity to emotional pressure. What they truly seek often, without consciously realizing, it is emotional safety. Not intensity, not constant reassurance, not overwhelming displays of affection, but a steady environment where they can exist without feeling invaded, judged, or controlled. This distinction is crucial because many people assume that increasing effort, attention, or emotional expression will bring someone closer. For an avoidant, it often does the opposite. Emotional safety for them means having the freedom to engage without the fear of losing themselves. It means knowing that connection doesn't come with hidden expectations or demands they can't meet. When they sense pressure weather, it's the urgency to define the relationship, respond immediately, or match a certain level of emotional intensity. It triggers a protective response. That response isn't about rejecting the person in front of them, about preserving their own internal balance. They pull back not because they don't care, but because they feel overwhelmed by the weight of what is being asked, even if it's unspoken. This is why creating a safe emotional space becomes more powerful than trying to create a strong emotional reaction. Safety allows them to lower their guard at their own pace. It gives them the room to explore connection without feeling trapped. And when someone feels safe, their natural inclination is to move closer, not because they are being pushed, but because they are no longer afraid. One of the most important aspects of emotional safety is non-reactivity. Avoidants are highly perceptive when it comes to shifts in emotional energy. If they sense frustration, desperation, or neediness, it reinforces their belief that closeness leads to pressure. But when they encounter someone who remains grounded, calm, and emotionally self-sufficient, it disrupts that pattern. It shows them that connection doesn't have to come at the cost of their independence. This doesn't mean suppressing your emotions or pretending not to care. It means expressing yourself in a way that is clear but not overwhelming. It means allowing space for the response instead of demanding it. For example, instead of seeking constant validation, you communicate your thoughts and then give them the freedom to process. That freedom is what builds trust because it demonstrates that you respect their pace rather than trying to control it. Consistency also plays a key role in creating safety. Avoidants may not always respond immediately or openly, but they are observing. They notice patterns. They pay attention to whether your behavior aligns with your words. When you show up in a steady, predictable way without sudden emotional swings or hidden agendas, it reduces uncertainty. And for someone who is sensitive to emotional unpredictability, that stability becomes deeply reassuring. At the same time, it's important to understand that emotional safety is not built through perfection. It's built through authenticity and patience. Avoidants don't need someone who never makes mistakes. They need someone who doesn't react in ways that make those mistakes feel overwhelming. When conflict arises, the way it is handled matters more than the conflict itself. Calm communication, mutual respect, and the absence of blame create an environment where they feel safe enough to stay engaged rather than withdraw. Another layer of emotional safety is the absence of suffocation. Constant messaging, repeated check-ins, or the need for continuous closeness can feel like a loss of space. And for an avoidant, space is not a sign of disconnection, it's a requirement for processing and maintaining emotional equilibrium. When that space is respected, it doesn't push them away, it actually makes them more willing to return because they know they won't be overwhelmed when they do. Over time, as safety is consistently reinforced, something begins to shift internally. The walls that once felt necessary start to feel less rigid. The need to withdraw becomes less urgent. They begin to associate connection with calmness instead of pressure. And in that state, they are more open, more present, and more willing to invest emotionally. This transformation doesn't happen through force or persuasion. It happens through environment. When you become someone who embodies stability, patience, and understanding, you create a space where they can experience connection without fear. And in that space, their natural desire for closeness, once hidden beneath layers of protection, begins to emerge on its own. There's a counterintuitive truth at the heart of attraction for someone with avoidant tendencies. The more you try to secure their attention through constant presence, the more you dilute the very thing that draws them in. Mystery and space are not games or tactics, they are conditions that allow their natural curiosity to awaken. Without those conditions, their interest doesn't deepen, it plateaus or even fades. This is because their emotional engagement is closely tied to discovery, not certainty. When everything is known, explained, and consistently available, there is little left for their mind to explore. And for an avoidant, the mind is where much of the connection actually forms. They are not always driven by outward expressions of closeness. They are driven by the internal experience of thinking about someone, wondering about them, and gradually piecing together who that person is. This process requires space. It requires moments where you are not immediately accessible, where your presence is felt but not constantly reinforced. Mystery in this sense is not about being secretive or deceptive. It's about allowing parts of you to unfold naturally over time rather than presenting everything all at once. When you reveal your thoughts, your emotions, and your experiences in a gradual, grounded way, you give their mind something to engage with. Each interaction becomes a layer rather than a complete picture. And it's those layers that keep them interested because they feel like there is always more to understand, more to discover. Space complements this by giving those layers room to breathe. When there is a pause between interactions, their mind doesn't shut off, it becomes more active. They reflect on what was said, how it was said, what it might mean. They revisit moments, replay conversations, and build emotional associations that deepen their sense of connection. Ironically, the absence of constant contact can make your presence feel stronger in their internal world. However, this only works when the space feels natural rather than forced. If distance is used as a strategy to provoke a reaction, it often carries an underlying tension that an avoidant can sense. That tension can create discomfort rather than curiosity. True space comes from having your own life, your own focus, your own emotional center. It's not about pulling away to create impact. It's about being fully engaged in your own path while allowing the connection to develop alongside it. Another important element is unpredictability in a healthy sense. When every interaction follows the same pattern, it becomes familiar but not stimulating. Avoidants, like many people, are drawn to experiences that feel alive and dynamic. This doesn't mean creating chaos or inconsistency. It means bringing variation into how you show up. Sometimes you are light and playful, other times thoughtful and reflective. Sometimes you initiate, other times you allow them to come forward. This natural variation keeps the interaction from becoming rigid and predictable. At the same time, this must be balanced with a sense of reliability. Mystery should not come at the cost of trust. If your behavior becomes confusing or contradictory, it disrupts the sense of safety that is equally important. The goal is not to keep them guessing about your intentions, but to keep them engaged with your presence. They should feel that you are steady in who you are, even if they don't know everything about you all at once. When mystery and space are aligned with authenticity, they create a powerful dynamic. You are not trying to hold their attention, you are allowing it to grow. You are not filling every silence, you are letting silence work in your favor. You are not over-explaining you or letting your actions and energy speak for themselves. In this environment, attraction becomes self-sustaining. They think about you because they want to, not because they are being reminded to. They reach out because there is a genuine pull, not because there is pressure. And as that pattern continues, their engagement becomes more intentional. What started as curiosity begins to evolve into a deeper form of interest, one that is rooted in their own internal desire rather than external influence. This is where connection shifts from effort to alignment. Instead of trying to manage how they feel, you create conditions where their feelings can develop naturally. And when that happens, their attraction is not only stronger, it's also more enduring because it is something they have built within themselves over time. One of the most misunderstood aspects of connecting with an avoidant is how they process emotion. Many people assume that direct confrontation, clear questions, explicit discussions, and immediate emotional expression is the most effective path to closeness. In many relationships, that's true. But with an avoidant, direct intensity can feel like being pushed into a spotlight they didn't choose. Instead of opening up, they instinctively retreat. Not because the topic is wrong, but because the delivery feels overwhelming. Avoidants don't ignore emotions, they experience them in a more indirect, internalized way. Their emotional world is often filtered through imagination, symbolism, and subtle cues rather than direct verbal exchange. This means they respond more naturally to emotional suggestion than emotional demand. When something is implied rather than forced, it gives them space to interpret, process, and engage without feeling cornered. Think of it like this. When you confront directly, you're asking for an immediate response. But an avoidant often needs time and internal space to understand what they feel before they can express it. If that time isn't available, if they feel pressured to respond on the spot, they're more likely to shut down or deflect. On the other hand, when you communicate in a way that invites reflection rather than demands reaction, you activate a different part of their emotional system. You allow them to come to you instead of pushing them to meet you where they're not ready to stand. This is where emotional imagination becomes powerful. Instead of stating everything explicitly, you create moments that carry emotional meaning without over-explaining them. A thoughtful message that hints at how you feel, a calm observation instead of a loaded question. A shared experience that speaks for itself. These are the kinds of interactions that resonate. They don't force an answer, but they linger in the mind. And for an avoidant, what lingers often matters more than what is said directly in the moment. For example, instead of asking, "Why don't you open up to me?" which can feel like pressure or criticism, you might express something like, "I appreciate the moments when you share even a little. It means more than you think." This doesn't demand a response, but it plants a seed. It gives them something to reflect on privately without feeling judged or exposed. Over time, those seeds accumulate, shaping how they perceive the connection and their role within it. Another key element is tone. Avoidants are highly sensitive to emotional intensity, even when it's subtle. A conversation that carries urgency, frustration, or expectation can feel heavier than intended. But when communication is calm, grounded, and open-ended, It feels safer to engage. The goal is not to suppress important conversations, but to approach them in a way that doesn't trigger their instinct to withdraw. Storytelling, shared metaphors, and light emotional framing can also be effective. These methods allow you to express depth without making the interaction feel confrontational. They create a bridge between your emotional world and there's one that doesn't require immediate crossing. Instead, it invites them to step onto it at their own pace. It's also important to recognize that silence for an avoidant is not always avoidance in the negative sense. Sometimes it's processing. When you give them space after expressing something meaningful, you allow their internal system to work through it. If that space is interrupted by repeated follow-ups or demands for clarification, it disrupts that process. But if it's respected, it often leads to a more genuine and voluntary response later. At the same time, authenticity must remain intact. Communicating through emotional imagination doesn't mean being vague to the point of confusion or hiding your true feelings. It means choosing a delivery that aligns with how they best receive and process emotion. You're still honest or just not overwhelming. Over time, this approach builds a different kind of connection. One that isn't based on immediate emotional exchange, but on gradual internal alignment. They begin to associate you with a sense of ease rather than pressure. They feel understood without being interrogated. And because they are engaging on their own terms, their responses become more genuine, more thoughtful, and more consistent. This is how emotional depth develops with an avoidant, not through force, but through resonance. Not through confrontation, but through connection that respects their internal rhythm. Consistency is one of the most underestimated forces in building connection with someone who has avoidant tendencies. Many people assume that strong emotions, grand gestures, or intense conversations are what create attachment. But for an avoidant, intensity without stability often feels unsafe. What they are quietly searching for is something far less dramatic yet far more powerful. A steady presence that doesn't fluctuate based on mood, insecurity, or reaction. At the same time, that steadiness must never cross into suffocation because too much closeness too quickly can feel like a loss of control. Consistency in this context is not about constant contact. It's about reliability of energy. It's about showing up in a way that feels grounded and predictable without becoming overwhelming or intrusive. When your behavior is consistent, it reduces uncertainty. And for someone who is already cautious about emotional closeness, reducing uncertainty is essential. They begin to understand what to expect from you, not in a rigid or limiting way, but in a way that feels safe. Avoidants are highly observant, even if they don't always express it. They notice patterns over time. They pay attention to whether your words align with your actions, whether your tone shifts unexpectedly, whether your presence feels stable or reactive. When there is inconsistency, hot and cold behavior, sudden emotional swings, or unpredictable reactions, it reinforces their instinct to keep distance. It confirms their internal belief that closeness can lead to discomfort or instability. On the other hand, when you are consistent, something different begins to happen. They start to relax, even if only slightly at first. The need to constantly assess or protect themselves diminishes. They don't feel like they have to brace for sudden changes or hidden expectations. This creates a subtle but important shift. They become more open to engaging because the interaction no longer feels risky. However, consistency does not mean being constantly available. This is where many people misunderstand the balance. If consistency turns into overpresence, frequent messages, constant check-ins, or a need to always be connected, it can quickly feel suffocating. Avoidants need space to process, to recharge, and to maintain their sense of independence. When that space is not respected, even consistent behavior can start to feel like pressure. The key is to maintain a rhythm that feels natural rather than forced. You show up regularly but not relentlessly. You communicate clearly but not excessively. You express interest but you don't demand immediate reciprocation. This rhythm allows them to experience connection without feeling overwhelmed. It gives them time to engage at their own pace while still feeling that you are present and dependable. Another important aspect of consistency is emotional steadiness. This means not reacting impulsively to their distance or silence. When an avoidant pulls back, it can trigger insecurity or frustration. But reacting with pressure, confrontation, or emotional intensity often pushes them further away. Instead, responding with calmness and patience reinforces the sense of safety. It shows that your presence is not dependent on constant reassurance or immediate closeness. This doesn't mean ignoring your own needs or tolerating behavior that doesn't align with your values. It means expressing your boundaries and feelings in a composed and grounded way. When you can communicate honestly without creating emotional volatility, it strengthens trust. They begin to see that connection with you does not come with chaos or unpredictability. Over time, this steady approach creates a foundation that is difficult to replace. While others may come into their life with intensity or excitement, those connections often fade because they lack stability. But a consistent presence stands out. It becomes something they can rely on, something that feels secure without being restrictive. As this pattern continues, their internal resistance begins to soften. The walls they built are not torn down forcefully, they gradually lower on their own. They start to engage more, share more, and invest more, not because they are being pushed, but because they feel comfortable doing so. This is the quiet power of consistency without suffocation. It doesn't demand attention, it earns trust. It doesn't overwhelm, it reassures. And in that balance, connection grows in a way that feels natural, sustainable, and deeply rooted. At the deepest level, avoidants are guided not just by what is real, but by what feels ideal in their internal world. They carry a vision, sometimes clear, sometimes subtle, of what connection should feel like. This vision isn't always spoken, and in many cases, they may not even be fully aware of it themselves. But it exists in the way they respond to certain energies, the way they are drawn to specific dynamics, and the way they pull back when something doesn't align with that internal picture. Understanding this changes everything, because it shifts your focus from trying to convince them in reality to resonating with them on a deeper, almost intuitive level. Their idealized vision is not about perfection in the traditional sense. It's not about flawless behavior or constant agreement. It's about emotional experience. It's about how they feel in your presence, whether they feel free or restricted, calm or pressured, intrigued or overwhelmed. When you align with that emotional vision, you become more than just another person in their life. You become a feeling they want to return to. Most people try to build connection by proving their value through effort-explaining, persuading, or over-delivering. But avoidants are not moved by effort alone. In fact, too much visible effort can feel heavy, as if there is an unspoken expectation attached to it. What truly impacts them is how effortlessly the connection seems to flow. When something feels natural, unforced, and emotionally balanced, it aligns with their internal vision of what connection should be. This is where subtlety becomes powerful. Instead of trying to match every expectation or anticipate every need, you focus on embodying qualities that naturally fit their ideal. Calm confidence, emotional independence, warmth without pressure, presence without control. These qualities don't need to be announced, they are felt. And because avoidants are highly attuned to emotional undercurrents, they pick up on this quickly, even if they don't immediately express it. Playing to their idealized vision also means understanding the importance of contrast. If everything is always available, always certain, always defined, it can lose its emotional impact. But when there is a balance of moments of closeness followed by space, depth paired with lightness, it creates a dynamic that feels alive. This dynamic mirrors the internal experience they are comfortable with, connection that exists, but does not consume. At the same time, authenticity remains non-negotiable. You cannot truly align with someone's idealized vision by pretending to be something you're not. Avoidants may not always confront inconsistencies directly, but they feel them. If your behavior is driven by trying to fit into what you think they want, rather than expressing who you genuinely are, it creates a subtle disconnect. The key is not to become their fantasy, but to allow your natural self to resonate with the emotional qualities they are drawn to. Another layer to this is emotional timing. Avoidants often move at a different pace when it comes to connection. Their ideal vision includes a sense of gradual development, where things unfold rather than accelerate. When the pace aligns with this, they feel more in control and more willing to stay engaged. But when things move too quickly, when emotions escalate before they've had time to process, it disrupts that vision and triggers distance. When you respect that timing, you create space for their internal world to catch up with reality. Their feelings begin to develop in a way that feels safe and organic. And because those feelings are not forced, they tend to be more stable and enduring. Over time, as your presence continues to align with their internal experience, something meaningful happens. You become integrated into their vision. You are no longer just someone they interact with. You are someone who fits into how they imagine connection should feel. And once that alignment is established, it becomes difficult to replace because it is not based solely on external factors. It is rooted in how they experience you internally. This is what makes the connection memorable and lasting. It's not built on intensity or pressure, but on resonance. It doesn't rely on constant validation, but on a consistent emotional experience that feels right to them. And when someone feels that level of alignment, they don't feel the need to leave. Because what? They have found matches something deeper than surface level attraction. It matches their internal sense of what connection is meant to be. Thank you for giving your time and energy to grow, reflect, and elevate your understanding of connection. Until next time, stay grounded, stay powerful, and never forget the right energy always attracts what it's meant for you.